Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode from yours truly, GuigLit. It gives me great pleasure to provide you with another subscriber request today. We are now starting to look in great detail at Othello, particularly key scenes. Today is Act 1, Scene 3 from the play itself. As always, be sure to like this video, give us a thumbs up, share it with all your friends, classmates and colleagues, and don't forget to hit the bell icon for more updates on all things books, beards and beyond. Truly great to be back after a little bit of a break. Don't forget also, if you've got any questions, you can either drop them on Twitter, Instagram or TikTok under GuigLit, or drop a comment below. Remember the GuigLit guarantee, every single comment is replied to. So, what we can do with today's video lesson. There are a number of things, as you all well know by now, where you can take notes, pause and reflect upon what you are learning and help it to annotate your copy of the play. You can use it as a revision tool. I'd encourage you to look back through it where you can, and as well as that, make sure that you are using it as other revision tools such as mind maps and listing examples to help build your understanding of Shakespeare's seminal play. So, before the events of Act 1 Scene 3, a very pivotal scene in the tragedy, we need to really get to grips with what's come before. So the play, as we know, takes place in Venice, which was its own nation state at the time. Italy didn't exist as we know it today, and was a very powerful trading state. Iago here is seeking to use Roderigo as a kind of foil. I refer to him later as a patsy. It's a very good word to use, in order to drive a wedge between the couple of Othello and Desdemona. Roderigo is so enamoured with Desdemona, Iago feels he can use him as a way in to destroying them all. Now, Brabantio, Desdemona's father, is enraged by this and goes to the Senate to air his grievances, which is why we are where we are in Act 1 Scene 3. So, Act 1 Scene 3 is a really pivotal scene in the entire play because it sets up an awful lot, but it's important to remember it takes place in the Venetian Senate. Now, this is the ultimate house of power in the state, and it's going to be an exclusively male setting. Please remember this, particularly if you are doing an assessment where you'll need to look at context. Particularly the context of setting is really important to this play. And in addition, don't forget, this scene establishes our tragic hero as well as his counterpart Desdemona. We see them at the apex of their powers. We see them in a very different light to how they will ultimately be portrayed as the play continues. So let's begin with the text itself. As always, I'll highlight the main things you'll need, whether it's from the perspective of love or the perspective of tragedy, or just the perspective of the play itself. We begin with the Duke and the Senators sitting at the table, and they are discussing the emerging battle in Cyprus, talking about how the Senators' letters say about 107 galleys. Venice here is preparing for war. Now, Cyprus is an interesting microcosm for the various battles and various conflicts that take place in this play. And it's important to remember this, as well as the fact that this scene takes place in the Senate of Venice, the most powerful location in what is a very powerful trading nation state as it is. We have a lot going on here that we need to contend with. But there is panic, there is dismay, there is the threat of Cyprus being overwhelmed. If Cyprus is overwhelmed, then Venice loses some of its power. And this continues into the next lines. We have this mention of the importance of the Cyprus to the Turk, the Muslim nations, as it were, in this kind of late Crusade era or post-Crusade era. And the importance of Cyprus, as I mentioned just earlier, is it's a trading route, but it's also between worlds. It's kind of a microcosm of Othello's own duality, where Othello is more in a Christian society. We have this blend in Cyprus of Christian, Muslim, order and disorder, an island nation under attack, whilst also being an island nation that is trying to establish itself. And these layers upon layers of conflict really fortify and develop this element of the tragedy that is about to unfold. And as this is all going on, we have Brabantio coming to air his grievances. Notice the first description by the senators of Othello, however, is the valiant Moor. This adjective valiant describes Othello in heroic terms, but he's also referred to, as he is regularly in the play, by his ethnicity and not his actual name. Whilst the Duke of Venice goes on to just mention him as valiant Othello, the first description is the valiant Moor. An interesting point to note. Now, notice how Iago and Roderigo are also in this scene, though they say very little in front of everybody else. They say nothing at all, as a matter of fact. So the Duke of Venice asks that they must straight employ Othello against the general enemy of the Ottoman, what we now know as modern-day Turkey. The Ottoman Empire is a big part of. Now, Othello's powers are respected by the Senate. We get this instant representation, as we do in other tragedies. In King Lear, the king himself, the titular character, is the most powerful character at the start. In Macbeth, he is clearly brave Macbeth. Well, he deserves that name. Here, Othello is the same. He's being established as the most powerful character from the get-go. Now, Brabantio then says, "Take hold on me, for my particular grief is of so floodgate and overbearing nature that it gluts and swallows other sorrows." He's of course referring to the fact that Desdemona has run away to marry Othello. And we see here how love is destructive and all-encompassing. He uses the metaphor of a floodgate. His grief at losing his daughter, and his perception of losing his daughter, is overbearing and all-encompassing. That it is ultimately going to destroy him, as it will do as the play continues. Brabantio then says, "My daughter, oh my daughter." And what I find very interesting about this line is it's very reminiscent of one of Shakespeare's other plays, the character of Shylock in The Merchant of Venice, where he says, "My daughter, oh my ducats, oh my daughter." As the Duke of Venice says here, he just simply says dead. It appears to Brabantio that Desdemona is dead, that he's lost her. He appears to be in mourning. We get this sense of how love can conjure up these effects of mourning and sadness. He says, "I to me as well, she is abused, stolen from me and corrupted by spells and medicines, bought of mountebanks, for nature so preposterously to err, being not deficient, blind, nor lame of sense, that sans witchcraft could not." Now, Brabantio here is accusing Othello of this, this phrase he's often accused of is this otherness. In this case is this mysticism, him being a Moor. He's treated with mistrust, and his ethnic origins are treated with mistrust as well. These unchristian practices of medicines and spells. Brabantio cannot believe that it can be love. There's a connection between love and magic in this sense, which is important to recognise and is worth paying close attention to. Now, as the play goes on, the Duke of Venice is brought into this Brabantio, and he says about these foul proceedings. He wants this to be heard in the Senate. And what's interesting here is Desdemona's assumed inability to act for herself, but there's also a hypocrisy of the Venetian Senate. They're willing to believe or take on face value Brabantio's accusations before they even know who they're aimed at or what they are, because they imply that there's an otherness that is antithetical to the Venetian state. So, we then go over to the scene itself where Othello appears. Brabantio says, "Here is the man, this Moor." And then notice again he's referred to in terms of his ethnicity, and Brabantio says, "Nothing but this is so," when the Duke of Venice asks, "What can you say to this?" Brabantio is so convinced that Othello's wrongdoing is that clear, he's assured of it. However, Othello hasn't yet spoken, and what's interesting about what Othello is about to say is we see him at the peak of his powers, the apex of his powers, that is. But Othello says, "Most potent, grave, and reverend signors, my very noble and approved good masters." His dialogue is statesmanlike. Notice how he is clear, he's calm, he's powerful in the way he is speaking and describing himself, and it's very different to how Othello later on emerges as someone fragmented and almost destroyed by Iago's manipulations. He admits, he says, "Rude am I in my speech, and little blessed with me the soft phrase of peace, for since these arms of mine had 7 years pith." He's talking here about being self-effacing. He is honest and humble. He's commenting on the fact that he's more of a man of war than a politician. However, the irony here is, in no other place in the play does he come across as more of a politician, which is interesting to note. He says here, 7 years pith, these arms of mine have used their dearest action in the tented field. Little of this great world can I speak, more than pertains to feats of broil and battle. Othello here is saying how, as just mentioned earlier, he's a man of war, not of politics. He's a man that knows the language of violence and the language of battle. And this will come back to haunt him quite significantly in the play's denouement. But for now, he gives this very rousing, very passionate speech that's said in such a clear and calm way, but in a deeply effective manner, where he admits that he did woo Desdemona, conjuring by any other name, as Brabantio is like to accuse him, but he will, in an around unvarnished, you notice that adjective, unvarnished, tale deliver how he won his, Brabantio's daughter. We get this sense that Desdemona is perceived as a prize or trophy here, but again Othello is talking about this in very humble terms. So continuing in this scene, we then have Brabantio throw back an accusation, how of years of country credit everything to fall in love with what she feared to look on, 'tis a judgment maimed and most imperfect. Love here is perceived as ruination by Brabantio, how Desdemona has fallen in love with what she feared to look on. She has lost everything. Notice the list: country, credit, everything. And love and danger are connected here, as they will often be throughout the play itself, which is interesting to note. Notice how he refers to it as a judgment maimed and most imperfect, criticising his own daughter, but equally criticising Othello in the same way. Love is being condemned here. He then says, with some mixtures powerful o'er the blood, or with some dram conjured to defect, he wrought upon her. He is again accused of superstition and witchcraft here, Othello. There's this deep connection between Othello's identity on an ethnic level and his belief that he is something other, that he is not one of the Venetians, that no matter how much he tries to assimilate, there's always something mystical or strange about him. And that's connected to his effects of love, that he's used some sort of magic or witchcraft to give Desdemona this feeling of love towards him. Now, this is almost dismissed. Othello, though, however, says to go to find her and let her speak before her father. Trust the office I do hold of you, the senators, not only take away, but let your sentence even fall upon my life. Notice the importance there of that phrase. There's an intensity in Othello's integrity. He believes that if he is speaking false, then upon his life it will fall. There's a real intensity in Othello's language that foreshadows the intensity of the end of the play. Othello's love is directly connected to such intensity as a result, not only for the fact that he's a warrior, which Desdemona falls in love with, this warrior aspect, but equally the fact that Othello is very much a character who holds integrity and honesty as a very key virtue. So Othello then says how he did thrive in this fair lady's love, and she in mine. Notice this phrase here. There's this idea of love being empowering. We've seen love as being something of witchcraft, or something to be suspicious of or fearful of, or love as being something connected to danger. But Othello here is describing love as empowering to him as much as it is Desdemona. So then we see this very, very famous passage from Othello himself of the history between Brabantio, Desdemona, and himself. How her father loved me, oft invited me, still questioned me the story of my life. From year to year, the battles, sieges, fortunes that I have passed. Othello admits and acknowledges the fact that he is a subject of fascination to Brabantio, has been previously, and this idea was quite an attractive one, an appealing one to Brabantio for years, this idea of this list, battles, sieges, fortunes. Othello was a man of mystery, but also a man of wonder to Brabantio, as much as he was to Desdemona. Later on, Othello talks of how he often did beguile her, Desdemona, of her tears when he did speak of some distressful stroke, and she gave me for my pains a world of sighs. She loved me for the dangers that I had passed, and I loved her that she did pity them. Here we have this range of how Desdemona falls in love with Othello for the very reason of his otherness, his war and tales of danger, the connection between pains and sighs as well, that for his pains she gave sighs, that Desdemona is in love with a very specific version of Othello. This very dangerous and warlike version of Othello is what attracts her to him. And as the scene continues, the Duke of Venice is very much caught up in this and is very much won over. He says, I think this tale would win my daughter too. They're saying here how Othello's eloquence is commended. This here is the tragic hero at his apex, the very peak of his powers. Othello has made the Venetian Senate believe in his cause in a very clear, calm, articulate manner. Pay close attention to Othello's breakdown of dialogue as the play continues, which is very much important. And as well as this, we see that he has the ultimate approval by the Venetians on every level, something that he wasn't naturally commanded or able to achieve owing to his ethnicity. Desdemona then says to Brabantio then says to Desdemona when she appears, where most you owe obedience. Desdemona is being reminded here of her obligations to her father. Traditionally, if we look at the context, it would be Brabantio that marries off Desdemona. However, Desdemona has gone against tradition in this setting and gone to marry the man she wished to. And Desdemona shows real power here in a way that doesn't come across so often later on in the play, when she's so submissive and obedient towards Othello. She says, "My noble father, I do here perceive here a divided duty. And so much duty as my mother showed to you, preferring you before her father, so much I challenge that I may profess due to the more my lord." Notice this, Desdemona's defying expectation. She's bold and confident, full of it, full of confidence. She also reminds her father of his hypocrisy, how her own mother ran away from her grandparents to marry Brabantio. This is a woman that's speaking in bold, confident terms in a place where she would ordinarily have no place to be. It's an important point to mention there with Desdemona. Brabantio then gives up the cause. He ultimately says, "I here do give thee that with all my heart, which but thou hast already with all my heart. I would keep from thee for your sake, Jewel. I am glad at soul I have no other child, for thy escape would teach me tyranny." Notice this important point here. Brabantio, love is equated to betrayal. There is parallels here to Othello's later downfall. Brabantio is hinting at the fact that if Desdemona was willing to betray her own father, there's a hint that she may well be willing to betray the general Othello. Interesting little parallel to mention. So, the Duke of Venice then starts to speak in rhyming couplets. He says, "To mourn a mischief that is past and gone is the next way to draw new mischief on. The rob that smiles steals something from the thief. He robs himself that spends a bootless grief." The Duke approves here of the marriage. Othello has won the Venetian Senate over, despite being of different ethnicity and despite being significantly older than Desdemona. He's managed to win them over to his cause, and these rhyming couplets bring a sense of approval and peace to the conclusion of this, which is important to know. Brabantio, however, is not fully won over, he says, but he bears both the sentence and the sorrow that to pay grief must of poor patience borrow. Brabantio again cannot go over the fact that he's lost his daughter. He's grieving for her. There's almost this combination of love and grief at this point, and time may not even heal this. Duke of Venice then goes on to say, "Slubber the gloss of your new fortunes with this more stubborn and boisterous expedition." Othello is being won twice over here, where he has been successful twice over. He's not only secured the hand of Desdemona in marriage, but his new role in leading the fight in Cyprus. Which is an important point to mention, particularly of the success he has won. Now, Brabantio refuses to have Desdemona back under his roof, and Othello does not wish to have Desdemona with him either, as he's about to go into battle. However, Desdemona pleads for the fact that she wants to find a charter in your voice to assist my sinfulness. She's pleading to go with Othello. This is highly irregular and unorthodox for a woman in a time of war. She persuades the Venetian state that she wishes to stay with him to his honour and his valiant parts did my soul and fortunes consecrate. Desdemona is too intertwined spiritually with Othello to leave him. Notice this sense, there's a moth of peace, she refers to herself as. And there's always a hint here at Desdemona's ultimate destruction, moths, like a moth to the flame. There's this idea that they're attracted to something that could well destroy them. And Desdemona hints at that very closely in that passage. So to continue, we then hear how she is allowed to go, and Othello then reassures the Venetian state how he will not compromise his role as a soldier in being a husband, which we ultimately realise is his downfall. "I will your serious and great business scant, for she is with me." He insists he will still get the job done despite her being there, although we know that the job is done. He is ultimately ruined by the machinations of Iago and the assumptions between Desdemona and Cassio. Then Othello says, "So please your grace, my ancient, a man he is of honesty and trust." Honest and trust. Notice how he refers to Iago there as my ancient. Iago is the loyal and dependent person who's been able to trust him for a long time. She will use the word ancient, demonstrates how far back Iago and Othello go, but also demonstrates how easy it will be for Iago to simply manipulate Othello. Then, just prior to the majority of the cast leaving, the Venetian Senate accept this, and Duke of Venice says to Brabantio, "If virtue no delighted beauty lack, your son-in-law is far more fair than black." There is a play on words here in a connection to the idea of race and virtues. Othello has assimilated here quite seamlessly into Venetian society despite his ethnicity. This idea of fair than black, fair virtuous qualities over his ethnicity and race. Brabantio here parts with a warning gesture, however. While the senator says to the brave more use Desdemona well, again Desdemona is spoken of as almost secondary to Othello, this verb use, almost like she is conquested. Brabantio says, look to her more if thou hast eyes to see. She has deceived their father and made thee. Brabantio's final words foreshadow, in a similar sense, I put inverted commas over this, future events in the play. This idea that if she's deceived her father, she's willing to deceive Othello in total. Now, Othello says, my life upon her faith, honest Iago, my Desdemona must I leave to thee. There's an intensity in Othello's language here. Notice the connection of life and faith, my life upon her faith. And he also entirely trusts Iago. He says, I leave to thee. He completely believes in Iago, Emilia, and trusts her to be left with them. So we see this intensity again through Othello's language, but he has this utmost limitless trust in the very man who will cause his downfall. Now Rodrigo and Iago are left on stage. It's the first lines they say, but notice how Iago instantly controls the dialogue. When Rodrigo says Iago, he says, what sayest thou, noble heart? Iago's instantly controlling the conversation here, and in doing so controls Rodrigo. Now, Iago's very simplistic about this. He just tells him to go to bed and sleep, whereas Rodrigo's fatal flaw is, it's silliness to live when to live is torment, and then we have a prescription to die. We see how his hamartia, his downfall, is his intense emotional state, which leaves him open to being manipulated and controlled by Iago. Iago is deeply dismissive of this, and he says, here I would say I would drown myself for the love of a guinea hen. He mocks Rodrigo's self-loathing and emotional state, saying he's going to be like that. What's the point in being like that for anything? You may as well say it's for a simple animal, as it may as well be for Desdemona. Rodrigo's despondent, however. He says, what should I do? He's a victim of his own emotions, and Iago plays this effortlessly, as we shall see in the following passage. Iago comments how virtue is a fig, 'tis in ourselves that we are thus or thus, our bodies are our gardens. Iago uses the analogy of gardens to suggest there's kind of human amorality. Humans are as good as gardens. What grows in them will prosper, and what doesn't, and it isn't looked after, rots. There's also a connection here to the biblical tale passage of Adam and Eve, the fall of man. Our bodies are our gardens. There's no great divine intervention here. It's simply we are what we are, and we choose to be. He then says here, power and corrigible authority of this lies in our wills. Our carnal stings, our embittered lusts, whereof I take this that you call love. Notice he says this that you call love. Iago detaches himself from human desires here. He makes himself sound as if he's above this kind of basic, debased argument of love itself. He says it's merely a lust of the blood and a permission of the will. Iago perceives humans, as I said earlier, as amoral. They're just basically animals. He completely rejects this notion of love, but he does use it, he weaponizes it to manipulate Rodrigo and Cassio, and later Othello. Notice the repetition of this phrase, put money in thy purse, or to make money. He's saying to Rodrigo, it's so effortless, you could make money off this. He believes the plan will work through the repetition of symbols and images of money. This plan to destroy the maw of Othello is going to be effortless. And Rodrigo then asks, will thou be false to my hopes if I depend on the issue? Rodrigo's gullibility is constantly played here by Iago. He believes fully in him, and he says, thou art sure of me, go make money, and I retell thee again and again, I hate them all. My cause is hearted. If thou canst cuckold him, thou dost thyself a pleasure, me a sport. Notice how he says Iago will gain revenge on Othello through this idea of infidelity from another person. But my cause is hearted, when I'd argue that Iago has many reasons why he has this cause himself. He never makes it entirely clear, but it's important to mention. Rodrigo says, I am changed, I'll go sell all my land. Notice that, all my land. Iago manipulates him to be his patsy. Now that's a phrase meaning somebody who takes the fall or the charge of something on the place of someone else when they plainly didn't do it. Now Rodrigo is very much Iago's patsy. He's the person that will cause the chaos that Iago wants him to. And then we are left with Iago's final lines. He says, thus do I ever make my fool my purse. He's openly acknowledging he is the key manipulator in the play. And don't forget, there is no point trying to apply moral relativism to Iago. He has no moral base. As we go, he lends another reason why he may possibly hate them more. 'Tis thought abroad that twixt my sheets he has done my office. He believes, or he suspects, that Othello has slept with Amelia. One of many reasons Iago gives for hating Othello, though none are ever fully pinned down, which is important to notice. In double knavery, how, let's see, after some time to abuse Othello's ear, he's openly plotting and scheming. He's probably the most explicit villain that there is in all of Shakespeare's canon, I would argue, up there with Richard III, in terms of such open, villainous scheming. It's important to notice. He is too familiar with his wife. He hath a person and a smooth disposed to be suspected. He's talking about Cassio here, the person who took Iago's suspected rightful role. And he also mentions how the Moor is of a free and open nature, that thinks men honest that seem to be so, and will as tenderly be led by the nose as asses are. He knows the hamartia of Cassio, the fact that Cassio is quite a womanizer, and Othello, how Othello is naive and too all-believing. And he's willing to manipulate those and expose those to get what he needs. He says at the end, I have it, is engendered, Helen night must bring this monstrous birth to the world's light. Notice how he connects here the idea of sex and birth. The monstrous birth was going to come about through infidelity, this monstrous birth to the world's light. This idea of the plan and the scheme that Othello is going to be falling victim to, and Iago is the one that will engender it. I have it. It's entirely his plan, and he's the kind of arch manipulator, an arch villain of the entire piece. Whereas we compare it to the tragic heroes that fall victim to other people, Macbeth falling victim to the witches, which is more of a supernatural ploy. Here Iago is the one that will bring his downfall about. It's a very human, very real element there to it. So that concludes Act 1, Scene 3. Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions, don't forget the GuigLit guarantee. Drop a comment, I'll happily answer. We're across TikTok, Instagram and Twitter. And until next time, all the very best, take care, and bye-bye.